Shuhan. Yakoewe ashka atoe khwashayekh yahayu ʼatángi tin. Yewo achtuasuku wuditsku aya yak yahayu ʼatángi toot jishagóoni. Dasa owa atut. Ye datune atoe yido sakwe verb. Yata aya achtuasuku tisaku. Kayaakní preverb, object, thematic, conjugation, subject, classifier, stem, suffix, postverb. So these are kind of the main parts of the verb. And a couple of things is there's going to be a difference between the word verb and verb phrase, right? So a verb is usually going to talk about this single word, like wugut, that's a verb. Or wudzageet, that's a verb. Ausaku, that's a verb. But you could put stuff in front of it, which is also, the object kind of sits in between the preverb and the verb. All that preverb means is like there's other words that can go in front of the verb, but they are part of the verb phrase. You can't remove them without changing the meaning and the function of that verb. Same with the postverb. They're words that come after the verb and they affect that verb in specific ways. So going through, so I made this board game, even though it's not complete, because I figured the book would probably take me a while. This stuff is in ʼatángi, quite a bit of it is. But I wanted to have a color-coded version that's really has a lot less of the explanatory text and really just sort of tries to get you quickly into these things and then get us identifying some of these parts. So sometimes we'll take a verb and we're going to say, what are all the parts in here? And then we'll be able to lay it out on this board and say, okay, there's a perfective marker, there the classifier is ya, and then there's gut. And that's how we get wugut. Yeah, so y plus wa, or y plus ya plus gut is wugut, right? So doing a couple of those things, and then other times we're going to start constructing verbs to say, okay, if I wanted to say, I went that direction, so you'd need in here, way day, so you'd have way day, and then here you'd have y for the perfective marker, here you'd have cha for me, or I'm doing it, then you'd have ya for the classifier, then you'd have gut, long and low, so then you'd have jishagóoni, way day, jishagóoni. So sometimes we're going to use this board to put the pieces together and then focus on like, well, when you have this and this and this, how do those sounds smash together? Because Lingít smashes together all the time. So going through, the idea here is I'm going to create tables for each of these that are color-coded and that show you what they are. For example, when you go to page 3 here, this is the preverb. So there'll be a little sort of marker over here to remind you, we're looking at the preverb now. There'll be a little bit of text, very short, just to say it's a spot before the verb for separate words that can affect the verb. And then it'll show you the ones that are listed. And so like a table like this, it's kind of complicated, but just trying to sort of present it. So what these thick green lines show is like you can have multiple ones of these, but you can't have any one of these three are a group, so you can only have one of them. And you don't have to have any of them. But clash, which could be, and this is something I still have to use, this could be clash, and this could be clash, and this could be hash, and this could be tish, and this could be tish, and this could be just the letter L. So like this is one that has a bunch of variations. And then I might, as I'm doing this, I might say, oh, I forgot one. And these are different. You can't have, well, I guess I would say, this is showing you guys what goes on under the hood when I'm making this stuff. So here, I'd say, well, these are one of these things where you can only have one of them, because you could also have shesh, which is don't. And that's different, right? And this will produce, you should have a prohibitive on here. Shesh ichaq, don't eat it, right? So there are things in here, and I'll try to put an explanation here, like this will push the verb negative. Like it needs to be in a negative form if you're going to have this in front of it. So like, this can create some confusion sometimes, because when you say, what is this phrase? Can somebody translate this phrase for me? Kleshwasa uti. I'll put it up here. Kleshwasa uti.
I'm okay.
Well, it's
Or
okay.
I'm not.
It's okay. So there's no chat in there, but you could say kleshwasa chat uti, right? Kleshwasa uti is it's okay, right? And so, but sometimes we forget with some of these that there is a klesh in there. So this is a negative form of that verb. So this verb is yati. And some of these are just kind of frozen. It's almost like when we say oti, we say it all as one sort of thing, and it gets sort of baked in our brain as this thing. So sometimes when we go through these things, this happens in the advanced class, is we'll say, okay, well, you could say uti. It was okay. And then you could say sa gukwati. I gotta put the underline on here. And sometimes there's little sources of confusion because a future verb, the stem always wants to be long and high. So someone wrote this long and high, and I said that one should be long and low. And they'll say, but it means it's okay, it will be okay. I was like, yes, but this is an interesting kind of weird thing because there is the negative here, so it needs to be a negative future. And so some of them, that's kind of an unusual one. Usually their logic is a little bit more straight lined, right? You know, this is a negative thing, means I'm not going to go there. Right? Because they might say, hey, you should go to this house, it's haunted, and there's all kinds of creepy things. I'm not going there, right? And so sometimes it's just a real straight logical thing. So, but you can have klesh and ade. So ade is towards. And then, but sometimes when I'm doing this work, I'm like, well, do I try and put all the things? Because you could have adach and you can have anach, and there's a whole bunch of things that have to do with motion and stuff. But I'm just listing ade because it's very common, and it also can do some of these ade verbiye things, which I'll get to. Then you have tlach, which is very, kunach, which is really, kudach, too much, which can contract. So this little squiggly line means it can contract. So kudach can become kudch, cowardly itchy, kudachayanaha, right? You could say it if you wanted to. Some of them, they do just contract and become a name though. Kut is astray or lost. And so with these, you could say any one of these, but you couldn't have two of them. I don't think you could say kunach kutch, but maybe. And these are some things like would have to field test some of these things. So some of this stuff is getting into theory. Qane is to start, and this is also, this also can be said, I guess I missed this one. Qane, yay. Okay.
So for gune, so that's kind of like the same verb like as yen iwenege, or because that one's are you ready, like ready to begin, right?
That it is different. It is different. So that's a good question. So yeah, like yange iwane. So here you can come up. So for example, here's yan and here's uwane. So there's the verb, like it is ready. And there is a pronoun, you could put a pronoun, there's an object pronoun right there, right? So this is a 0 because it. So you could say yan khatuwane, I'm ready, yan hawane, we're ready, yan iwane, you are ready. So then we can switch this and we can say yan iwane, you are ready. Now that's a statement. That's a statement, right? And then you could say yan ge iwane, are you ready? And this could change to ye. Yan ge iwane, are you all ready? And a lot of dance groups have said this. There's a lot of Tlingit people who know how to say this, but they don't always know like how to start shifting it around. Like you could say yan khatuwane, yan hawane, yan khatwane, I'm not ready. So you could start to move this thing around. But then you could also say, I could say, maybe I'll say no. Where'd my little thing go? So I could say Tlake, I'm not ready. But then I could say, and this is a separate, it's outside, it's in front of the verb. This program does not allow the combined characters, so doing the underlines is a pain. So I could say Qone yande khatka qone. And what is that saying? Anybody know?
No, I will not be ready.
Well, Qone is to start. Yan, when you go to a future, it's going to switch to yande. So I could just say this on its own, right? Like for example, someone says, we're going hunting tomorrow, 5 a.m. I could say, yande khatka qone, I will be ready. That's a future form. I will be ready. If you throw qone in front of it, qone yande khatka qone, I will begin to get ready. Right? I'll begin to get ready. So this qone means to start doing something, to begin doing something. It pops up before the verb, and you could use it in a bunch of different ways. Qone adachwugud. They started to walk away. Right? But really your focus is on the initiation of the action, whatever it is. Qone akaushihit. Sat qoyeqa qone akaushihit dukuku. He finally started writing his book, right? So what it focuses on when the action is beginning. Good question. There's another spot here for adverbs, and I listed all of those separate from what we've got here, and we will take a look at them. And then we've got, so here's a big list. So this list is pretty big, and I'm pretty sure that you can only pick one of the, you can't have multiple of these. So for example, if you have K, doc would take its place. I think so. And this one actually needs to go. I'm figuring this out as we go too, So doc in the future, and these are things that I want to know, is that in the future or in progressive imperfectives, it's going to switch to docte, and this is going to switch to, oops.
Pune, can I ask, is this in the order that you have them? Like I see the green line, and I remember there was like within a preverb, there's these order of things. So is that the same way here where yun would come before chush? Is
Yes.
that okay? Geez.
So trying to sort of figure those things out too. So, and then I'm going to have to, I'll double check these. So it's not ready yet. So like chush and whoosh might jump above these. And so once I double check these. And so the place, there is a pretty complicated text that I think we did start looking at here, which is the Lingít Grammar Handbook by James Crippen. And so the place where you might go to answer some of these questions, like which one goes first then, is as you scroll down quite a ways, and then you start getting right around here. This is the template structure. So this and the next page show you the order of all of these things. And so this shows you what these things are, and then you go down, and then it shows you some examples of what you might see there. So this is number 17, and he's got them by A, B, C, D, E1, E2, F. And so it's complicated. So I'm trying to sort of find a little bit of a more visually easy to digest guide. I think this is wonderful. But if you're not into like super into tables and stuff and like short form of things, and we need a long form to learn it, so then you can come to this short form and look it up really quick. So here you're going to see, so what this means is in spot number 17, just like we're saying, you can have qone, qut, but you can't have qone, qut, ne. You can't have those. And so just trying to sort of figure out like how to express those things, because you can qut, ye, qut, ya, you can have those, right? So in this case, these are saying what the number says is these are these types of things. And what the letters say is like there's a little, it's like a slot machine. There's a little spot here, a little spot here, a little spot here. They're on the same wheel. Can't have them both at the same time. And then you have whoosh here and dach and a hus and then chush and all these other things start popping up in here. So yeah, I think I got them right. Other questions?
I really appreciate you doing this because the color, it's much more, and even just to take one of them, right? And say, okay, tonight I'm going to look at the preverbs and just, and that, but yet to see it in the larger framework and to try to make a game out of it. I mean, that's really great. Gonna cheat.
Yeah, and so a lot of these ideas come from just talking with other learners over the years, talking with Joel Isaac, who teaches Dinaina, and he does very similar things because their language is different. It's a cousin language, so it's like, oh yeah, ours is this way. We've got these classifiers. This is what a classifier does for us. So they've got the same things, but they all use different sounds, and they kind of have different functions. But if you learn Tlingit, you could go learn Dinaina. Like, not saying it would be easy, but it would be you'd recognize, and same with Navajo. You'd be like, oh yeah, we've got that thing too, you know. So the goal here is to create a slightly more visual, like it's just spread out more. And then we're going to walk through this stuff and have specific examples. So the idea is like at the end of the preverb chapter, we'll just show a whole bunch of verbs and make the preverbs in green to show like what they're doing, how they're working. And so I still got to do a little bit, I think, of separation on here because I do think you can have because I've heard a speaker say that, right? So I do think there's going to be another line probably right here, which maybe I'll just make it now so I don't forget. That's what I do. That's what I do with my time, is try and figure out all this stuff. I'm like, well, I'm going to figure out the next thing and the next thing to make it more and more sort of visual and create some activities so that, because all this stuff is it's abstract until you see it in action. But the idea is to sort of show you all this stuff. And I know some people get very frustrated because like when I hear some people like, they'll say, hey, who teaches that class? And I'll tell them like, well, do they kind of move into the language and stay in the language, or do they do a whole bunch of structural stuff? It's like, are you asking if they teach like me? Because that sounds like you're trying to avoid having me as a teacher, which is fine. That's fine. You know, everybody's choose your path, right? Um, but
I
then
mean,
sort
just the fact that you have the yay, yay, being able to just see that, and then that slot machine idea of like, okay, let's start playing with these and interchanging them and just getting, I think that's really helpful because it's still a mystery and you're showing us and breaking down like, okay, be careful the high tone or the low tone because it could have a different meaning right there.
right. And when you say tsuye ekwasetin, that's the one you're using. And it's there because it's a ka conjugation future verb, and it has to be there. It has to. When you say kenakain, it's getting better. This is the K that you're going to use, right? And so there is an upward one there, which maybe I could. Well, I'm not putting directional stuff in here. I'm just putting like things that are super functional in the verb. So the other thing when you're doing stuff like this too is you gotta just keep cutting stuff out. Like I think we were talking about this last night because some folks are really wrestling with the pronoun ush, right? And so, and then at one point I think they said, how come you didn't tell us about this? I said, well, we don't tell you everything all the time. We keep some things behind the curtain because there's so many things. It's like when I was learning Hawaiian, I was like, hey, I learned how to use this pronoun for my. And then someone who speaks Hawaiian, they said, oh, they tell you there's 3 of them? It's like, no. They're like, oh, yeah, it's because they don't want you to know that yet. But I'll tell you, it's because a person has 3 belly buttons, one on their head, one on their belly button, and one on their groin. The one on the head connects you to your to the thought world and this to the sort of kind of spirit world. And then the one in your belly button connects you to your ancestors because that's how your mama fed you. And the one at your groin connects you to the future generations because that's how you make them. And so you got to pick how you're connected to the things and they're all associated with a vowel. And I was like, wait, my head just exploded. And so, but we do that in Lingít as well. And so there's going to be times when we go over some stuff like this and you'll be like, how come you didn't tell me? It's like, well, we had to withhold because like, okay, we're going to look at this thing. Now we're going to look at these things. Then we're going to look at these things. And so, um, yeah. So there is a spot up here and this is where the adverb goes. And so sometimes there'll be a thing with like little squiggly brackets that says you could pick something from the list down below if you want to. And then there's a big list of adverbs here, which we can go over at a future point. So then after all the adverbs, like some of them are very, like kedain, to do something well. What are some other ones that, dehua, if you're from Teslan, finally. Day could pop up, you know. Like say you study all this stuff or I don't know, someone's trying to tell you something and you already know it. Say dehua saku. I already know that, right? Uh, and then some of them, like I said, like I'll go through and figure out which ones need examples because some of them are really common, like chayak or chayuk means like suddenly this thing happened, like in the context of telling a story, right? Um, then we get to the object, and this is where I kind of left off. Just a little bit more text explaining what an object is. And then I know we've talked in here about indirect objects, so we're going to have some of that stuff in here. Then we're also going to have woochin and wooch, some of the differences between those. Dach, I don't think we've mentioned dach and daqa. You can pluralize what's usually a non-human, but can also, I think, be a group of people that are doing something individually, which, of course, there's one for that. And then your run-of-the-mill object pronouns, which we'll go through. Chat, ha, I, yi, 0 or ka, ut, sh for the self, and then ush for that person we've been talking about, like the main character, and then some of them or one of them. So that's kind of where things are at with this booklet. So I'm probably going to try and kick up the speed on it so that we can go through it as we sort of, because historically we'll go through things with like this is kind of the next big presentation in the line of presentations for intermediate Lingit, where we go through things and we start looking at examples and we start manipulating them and getting used to changing these things, and then continue to supplement that with speech acts that we're doing. Thoughts?
Do you think it'll be done by the summer? I was thinking this would be something great to study over the summer months.
Yeah, that's the goal. So I'm gonna
That's
get
a
it
goal. Okay.
done probably the next 2 or 3 weeks, mostly because like I've written a lot of this stuff before, and so a lot of this stuff you could find in ʼatángi, but really that's a book to just sort of describe it all. And then I've always known we need more activities and more hands-on things to show how to put this stuff into action, and then how to use this type of stuff to say, well, let's launch into conversation. We've done a bunch of future verbs. Everybody go write 10 sentences about what you're going to do this summer, because those will all be future verbs, right? So that's the goal, is to sort of learn a thing, do hands-on activities, and then give some assignments so folks can go dive into some of that stuff.
You deserve it too.
Sheesh. Okay, should we take 5? Okay, take 5, we'll come back and we'll look at this a little bit, but then we'll just probably get into a couple of little stories and things. Yaka achtuasaku yashkalneek dat yijituni. Yisaku shkalneek klein kudzati sha dag ha inakawanik. Adatwe yutachutan. Guksako awe kusacha kwan. Echosaku. Atlein ko ko ahas ausaku yashkalneek. Helchas lingit. Nishka. Koyakan. Atlein ko ausaku yashkalneek. Gulkunachoi. Klagu. Chuchagu dachaya. Yadua kusacha kwan. Gutil yiduasak hu. Gutil. Desire kustian. Kusacha kwan yiduasak too. Tatleinach at awe yechwaji. Kusacha kwan. Gutil yiduasak. Yadu hu. Du yahai hasuahin. Anachtedi. Klak an dach anachtedi. Gwalli satin duch a da. Lleech. Eich sak eichi. Chak. Duch eidch aya. Has a kaus chayen. Chak. Sak eichi. Yadu a. Chutz. Chutz yidu a sago at. Sa would do jaken yat atin. Chutz. Yechoji yak eyi as. Gwall chutz itoasagu ytle yechi. We as. Chutz yidu a sago. You do a sock away we as. A ka aya yakana age. Lingít as. Chutz you do a sock. Gweil. Tikisani. Ketlt. Táax'aa. Ye awa asai kudzati yashkalneek tin. Asa hu awa. Yadu ye daduni ye at. Yadu. Yidat. Ziyagen. Kijk, yidat. Ziyak. Ziyagen. Alloon. Awatloon. Akwatloon. Yatig. Wootig. Kekwatig. Gwashiasatin we ziyak ayi. K kudzati. Ga atuyeti. Ga. Ga. Yanakut, Wugut, Gurkagut. Oh, Yisat Kutzati, let's Yisat Khwalayech. Ah, Guksa. Ja, der. Ja, der. Yek, Yanakut. Yek, Yanakut. Ja, Yidat. Yek, Uwakut. Yek, Gurkagut. Ja, du Hini. Dak. Ja, du Dak. Awe Adak. Iqde. Iqde. Yek, Uwakut. Kayat etsu. Tlam. Meka Klasatina Hatuti. Yadeha. Yek Uwakut. Yata. Dakasa. Yek Uwakut. Klesh Yek Wugut. Klesh Yek Wugut. Yada Yisitin Klesh. Like Klesh. Klesh. Akakushi. Akakuwashi. Akakukwashi. Yat atsu. Aka. Gwalchakut a ituasaku. Kate kushi. Kate kuwashi. Kate kukwashi. Ausatin. Ausatin. Ye agursatin. Gwalchiatatsu. Zayagan ai. Ye. Yisatin. Qa. Atuyeti. Qa. Oops. Ashakhisht. Ashakhisht. Ashawachich. Ashawachich. Ashakquachich. Ashakquachich. Galchakuta. Ye naskit. Wudzgit. Ye qaskit. Yadu yetsu. Qa. Qa. Ach. Ya anastain. Ach. Ausata. Ach. Agursata. Yadu wuna. Wuna. Huja. Yatik. Ya analkuts. Ya analkuts. Aushikuts. Aushikuts. Agurshikuts. Agurshikuts. Wushdach. Ye away. Tik. Katik yacheti at. Oh, yata gwashnisa tachji wutze. Yata. awashat, awashat, ke'akwashat, ke'akwashat, ke yisatin, ga atuyeti. Hi. Click, 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 click. What's happening? Khati. Yada. Jadi khadna. Shoot at the ark. Shoot out the ark. Shoot the ark. Gun out the yech. Yada. Shoot out the ark. A kade ya an khut. A cut our khut. A kade a kwachut. Ashuch. Aushuch. Ke a guchauch. Ke is a teen. Ga a tuyeti. Astacht. Ausatag. Ke a guchsatag. Yatatsu. Ke ga. Gisaku. Ya yidat yashkalneek tu. Takka ye hawuti. Kakaya wuti kakusti ak. Kusakakwan kutsati wegao. Kleinachka awalun. Kleshyekwugud. Du kik du irakuashi. Kleshyekwugud. Ya kiki a du hunchu haskakuashi. Kusakakwan ausatin. Kusakakwan shawe shawachich. Woodzagid. A dach ausata we yadak klegwel tude. Awe aku ach awe atu dach ke wugudi. Ashkuds yatik isani. Awe shot we kusacha kon kusi. Gan wugudi awe ashawachich. Shoot at the ark kle a cut awe chut. We kusacha kon ketli awe aushauch. Kawayich yuwne awe Táax'aa chusati. Ajawe Táax'aa chukas takch. Ye awe shkalneek. Thoughts or questions before we start looking at it line by line?
Táax'aa, does that mean one who bites and comes from the same root as the verb?
Ye awe. And then the S classifier is for an insect to bite. But it's not called Táax'aa, it's called Táax'aa. Oops. Okay, I can't remember how far we got on this. Maybe we might start over and just do them kind of quickly. Takka yehawuti. Translation?
Is that the same T verb root that's like the it will be?
Mm-hmm.
So the woo. I'm kind of uncertain about the woo, but like inland, our it will, or it we will be.
We were. So wuti. So this is one, like if we did this same type of thing, I just couldn't find a way to illustrate it. But if we wanted to take this verb, it would be yeati, yewuti, yekwati. And so this one on its own is to be. And the ye is saying to be a certain way. So like, it is that way, it was that way, it will be that way. You can have an object in any of these. Yechatyati, that's how I am. Yechatwuti, that's how I was. Yechatkakwati, that's how I'll be. This one has, there's a few of these verbs where you could put some different things in front of it, then you got a whole different meaning. Like you could say, Hin itinech chatyati, I need water. Hin itinech chatwuti, I needed water. Hin itinech chatkakwati, I will need water. So the ye falls out, but the verb itself stays the same. There, kliye, kliyeyati, it is still. Kliyewuti, it was still, like it wasn't moving. Kayekakwati, or kayekwati, it will be still, not moving. So, but if we put a location in front of this, with a location marker, usually, it means to be at a place. So I could say, Deshu yeyati, it or they are at Héen's. Deshu yewuti, well, usually you say Deshu yeyati, they are at Héen's. Deshu yewuti, they were at Héen's. Deshu yekwati, they will be at Héen's. So in this case, we were in the interior.
Rene, how did you use, you're saying, I want water, and like, tell me again how, because I'm thinking of tuasigu instead of the
This is need.
need. And how does that translate with the yati, meaning to be?
So I need it, or in this case, they need it. They did need it. They will need it. So that's one where you don't use it that way a whole lot. But if I was telling some story, I needed a knife. But then there's usually something about like how I made one out of a rock or whatever. Or I might say or I could say you're going to need a knife. So this one is to need something. But there's a whole bunch of these yati verbs. Like same with, you could take this same pattern. So we've got, yati, wuti, kakwati, maybe I'll put them up on the top. And now I could change these to khan, yach. It is red. It was red. It will be red. So the point of looking at it this way is saying, if you can learn how to change this verb, you could learn to change a whole bunch of these. These are all different verbs. So sometimes if you put certain words in front of it, it just changes the meaning. So instead of being, this is needing, this is being a certain color, or being like something. And you could say, waqayati, it's pleasing. Ach waqayati, that's pleasing for me to look at. Ach waqawuti, ach waqaqaqati. So that's what I was saying with that.
Rene,
Ah,
could you please deconstruct itinach? Because I'm wondering if it's something like noun, empty base, with, through.
do we know this one? Iti, the remains of something. And then nach. So it's an interesting, like you can nerd out on the philosophy of this one if you want to. When you are through the remains of something, that's when you need it. So you could say, and the phrase, I heard this one time from a widow. We really need our loved ones. And and it was said from someone who had just recently lost their husband of a long time. So yeah, this is ite. And so it's another one of these words that has a meaning. It means like what's left when it's gone. But then it has a whole bunch of uses, and it's one of those ones that has like a pretty big cultural meaning. You see it in place names. Sit itiqi, the bay that's in the place where the glacier was. That's the name for Glacier Bay. You see it in some things like atcha ite. There's some crumbs here because someone was eating. And then
Sit ite shanach.
sit ite shanach, the valley where the glacier used to be. Right? So sometimes it's the thing that's left over. Ha itiqahu, our descendants, the people that will be in our remains. Ooh, okay. All right. Takayabutiq hakustiach. Thoughts on the translation?
There really, or there is so hard was our life.
Yeah. Yeah. So tlach is, I would usually say tlach is very, punach is really. And there's another thing where like those are very close to the same thing. But punach can also mean real. Punach lingít chasati. We're real human beings, right? Yes, our life there was so hard. So Táax'aa, this could mean also like a hard surface, but it in this case it means difficult or to be hard. Like it was a hard life. Hakusti, our life, there at that place. So this is Tlingit does this a lot. It names where the place is, and then it switches to referring to it as there.
It interests me that Tlingit and English are parallel in using the same verb for both a hard surface and being difficult, because it wouldn't have to be that way.
Right? Yeah. And so there's some where like, oh yeah, there's that metaphor kind of works the same, or that connection, right? For some, and then you also have shidzi, and shidzi doesn't really compare to something, that just means difficult. But then yatik, those, they seem to be slightly different as well. Like if you're going to say like, I had a hard time, you'd use yatik. But if you say it was hard to accomplish, you'd probably use shidzi. Kusachakon kutzati wegao.
Is that the cannibals existed that time?
Yeah, and for this story, this is something I don't have a for sure answer on, but I think when we say kusachakwan, we're talking about this cannibal monster. There's probably you could probably say kusachaku'u if there was a group of cannibals for whatever reason, right? And so I think this refers to this creature that's name is Gutish, and that there's a specific image of it that's made. And this story, what I was saying earlier at the beginning, this is another one of these stories, like the woman who married a bear. We actually call it Hoots, the woman who said something to offend the bears. That story exists in Haida. That story exists in Kayaakní. This story exists in Nishka in this story exists in Kayaakní. So this story is in quite a few different cultures, which is really interesting. But yeah, I would say yes, there were cannibals at this time. But as I sort of thought about this more, I might just say the cannibal existed. And what's interesting too, so here's another verb. We'll do another one of these little verb exercises. So if we took this one, this is the same verb root, but we're going to change it. We're going to say kudziti. And then here, we're going to say kudziti. And then here, it's going to go low tone because it's conjugation. And then you're going to get cook sti. It will exist. Exists, born, will exist. And there is an it on here as well. And there is a noun version of, like, how to make a noun out of a verb. I don't fully understand it. Like, there seems to be a couple of different patterns. And this is, I was talking to James Crippen. Oops, what did I do? I was talking to James Crippen about this. And he was saying, well, it changes somehow. So when you look at it or hear it, you think there's no way that could be a verb because it can't conjugate this way. So this one is life. This is the word for life. And so, like, you could say, this life is really hard. If you're just having a hard day, whatever. And so so this one, if we took the S out of there, this is weather. So this is life. And if we follow these same rules of possession, so if we put ha in front of here, then we should want to put y on here. But when we put a suffix on, that's going to push this short high vowel long and low, and now that's going to push this one up back to high. That's how we get hakusti. It's all built out of this same stuff, right? So once we continue to push ourselves and understand how verbs work and then how you create a noun out of it and how you can possess that noun, then the pieces start to sort of click all over the place. Maybe. Gwashiwe. Check the chat. Okay. The cannibal. And what's interesting too, like, just pay attention to this stuff as you continue to learn more Tlingit and study the stories. When does a storyteller switch it to present tense? Because that's what happens right here. Because you could have said the cannibal existed at that time. That's how you do the past tense. Because I don't want to spoil the story, but it gets killed. Táanáx'aa awatún.
There was one hunter, or one man was a hunter. One man was hunting.
Yes, one man went
It.
hunting. There we go. Yeah, well, one man went hunting. So that's where you got Táanáx. And if you could say Táanáx awatún, and that's saying they went, a singular person went hunting by themselves. But you could also say Táanáx'aa awatún. They're kind of saying the same thing. Kayaakní wugud.
He didn't come down, meaning back.
Right. So They do translate this when you read this Táax'aa story. And the idea here is we have a cooked down version. So it's like when you want, if you want to make that, was it like your balsamic vinegar really cooked down and just get it really yummy, you got to cook it down and get much less of it. And so what we've done is sort of like cut this story down to like, I think 20 lines and simplified a lot of these lines. So as we take a look, when we're finished with this, we might step up and look at the next version where the version they start to get a little bit more complicated. But in this case, yeah, like this literally means they didn't go to the beach, but it could also mean they didn't come down from the mountain. So that's how you would say coming down from the mountain would be yeqwugut. It doesn't matter what side down you come down. It's just sort of how directions work in Tlingit. But in this case, when you read the Táax'aa story, they say he didn't come back. But you could say that's they didn't return. But there's a reason why these things are told this way, though, because it's up in the mountains where this person lives, or this thing, I guess we'll call it.
Hune,
Oh,
the nach, why isn't it tlecha, like one, what's the nach do again?
yeah. So tlecha is the word for 20, which means it literally means one person, one, tlecha. It's adding tlech and ka, and they combine to become tlecha because you have 10 fingers and 10 toes, so it's 20. And that's how you used to count to everything. Like if you want to say 142, that should, I gotta do the math, so it should be dachadushu tlecha kadech. That's the old way of counting, is you'd say 7 people and 2. But when you're counting, like when you're actually saying, oh, there's 3 people over there, to count people, you put nach at the end. Naski nach ku'u, you. Or like to say, I have 3 kids. Naski nach away achyetki. Doesn't need a verb at all. They are 3 people, my kids. And so that's what you go tleinach, naskinach, or tleinach, dachnach, naskinach, dachuninach, kijininach. That's technically how you count people. And then, so like coming up to counting, and this stuff gets really fun too, because we got 100 ways, we got 16 different ways to carry things. Like I think Simshan has like 16 different ways to count things. Because like, oh, what are we counting? Empty bags? What are we counting? Buckets of water in it? What are we counting? Sticks? So they would use the same classification system, but for counting. But for us, so like we have tleich, which would be a number, right? 1, right? And that works. Tleich kate, 1 dog. Tleich douche, tleich os, tleich shah. But if you're going to count people, then you're going to switch to tlei nach, and that's 1 person. So that nach is a signal, even though it looks like these other nach and these other things, don't worry about that. It just means we're talking about 1 person. Then you have tleqa, and this is once. So the qa is count, or no, sorry, not once, but 1 by 1. So this is saying like how many in a set. So dacha would be pairs, right? So we're going to do it in sets of 2, sets of 3, sets of 4, and then the last one would be tleidehin, or sometimes people say tleichdehin. I've heard both of them, and that one is once. And then the last, I was trying to get this one, so you'd say because we were trying to say we're going to work in pairs, and that would be dachka nach. I took a guess. I said, would it be dachnachka? No, dachka nach. So that's how, these are the different ways you can count things. And I was missing that. So there's kleich, kleinach, kleicha, kleicha nach, kleidehin. What am I doing? I can't talk and type at the same time today. Okay, so there it is. Now you count everything.
Gonna cheese.
Knocked on the table 3 times. Oops.
Now I can't get knocked 3 times on the ceiling if you want me. Old song.
Oh yeah, there you go. It's hitkachi is the ceiling. It's underneath the roof, or beneath the roof is what it's called. Hitkach is the roof. Hitkachi is the ceiling. Okay, let's see. Any questions? We might have time for 1 or 2 more. Okay. The other thing is, we haven't really gotten there yet. In the interior, life was hard. We could probably say very, right? And then we have the cannibal exists at that time, right? Just like doing interest, like looking at the tense and how it's functioning, how time is functioning here. One man went hunting. Now that could be one person too, right? In the context of the story, we know that it is a boy. Like we'll get to that. There's these 3 brothers in the story. And he didn't come back down. What's going to happen is, I'll give you a major hint, is someone is going to emerge as the main character. In Tlingit stories, this happens. Like this is, I think a lot of cultures do this, right? Like most movies you watch, there's one main character, right? And so in this, the main character does emerge, and it's the youngest brother. And we're going to get there, but I'll say that because when we start looking at stories, they'll tell us who's doing the thing. And we just assume every verb is that person doing the thing. And if it's someone else, it will be marked. It'll be marked in certain ways here, and as you get to the bigger version of the story, you'll see some more complicated ways that Tlingit does that. But if this story is about Raven, just assume every verb you see that's an action verb or motion verb, that Raven's doing it. But they'll tell you if it's someone else. Dukik du iqaquwashi.
His younger brother, he found his younger brother, or he will find his younger brother.
Okay, so that's a good prediction. But the iqa is looking for. So his younger brother went searching for the older brother, right? And so, but in this case, you could also say him, right? So this is because you have the d in both places, and in this case, the d is the same person. So you'd say this person went hunting, didn't come back. His younger brother looked for him, right? And these are both third-person pronouns, but we haven't been introduced to anybody else yet. So the only way to really interpret this at this point, that single person who went hunting had a younger brother who went looking for that single person who went hunting, right? We don't have any names or anything, so we got to just sort of go by those things, which they are cued in there, right? Because this is younger sibling, same gender, and then we already know who didn't come back, right? Who didn't return. Real quick, we will go up here, and this will be the last thing. So we do have we're going to use the perfective for this one. And this is one, we're going to do a little bit of Tlingit finer points here. My dog is ready for me to be done. I know we're at time, so I'll be fast. So aqaqhuashi, akachhuashi, and then uwat-a, or uwat-e. These are closely related concepts, but they are different. Aqaqhuashi, they were looking for it. Akachhuashi, They found it while looking for it. Uwat-e or uwat-i. They found it without looking for it. They just came upon it. So those are three similar concepts, but in terms of the meaning, they are quite different. So you say, I was looking for my keys and I found them. You could put that all in one sort of verb, right? One verb phrase. But this one would be like, hey, I found this key. Just sitting in the middle of the road. But this is one I think that wasn't always clear, and I think is even marked reversed in some dictionaries. So don't be surprised if you look in a dictionary and say, well, this one says that this is to find something by looking for it. No, this is the looking for it part. It means like feeling around in a giving space is really what it sort of means. Okay. Gonna cheesh. To be continued. There's your cliffhanger. He was looking for him. What happened? Okay. See you folks on Tuesday. Cheesh.
See, that's a tea and a cheese.